Welcome to this recorded session looking at Trinity, TESOL, and TrustED. If you couldn't make the live session, this will review some of the things we talked about and expand a little on the TESOL specifically and how we run it at Dublin TEFL. We'll look at the qualification requirements for teachers and for academic managers under the TrustED scheme and zoom into the TESOL specifically, TESOL for teachers and for academic managers. Overall, we're looking at how the qualification can work for you, how you can put the qualification to work, if you like, for yourself and for your school. And we'll finish with some example coursework areas to illustrate that. First, let's look at the teacher qualification requirements as set out in the ELE code. So for teachers, the standard route, shall we say, is a level 6 ELT qualification. So that could be a Trinity Cert TESOL, it could be a Cambridge CELTA, on top of a degree. With young learner teachers, there's also a requirement for young learner teacher training. That might be a certificate, something like a Trinity TILEC, Young Learner Extension Program, or it's something you can do in-house through your inductions or through a specialized training program you have for younger learners. It says here level 6 ELT qualification. What does that mean? You might be or you might not be familiar with qualification frameworks. As you can see on the top row here, so a Cert TESOL or a CELTA is level 6 or level 5, depending which framework we're looking at. So we have NFQ and the NQF. Here's a quick quiz for you. Which is which? Which one is the Irish framework? And what's the other one? Okay, I won't keep you in suspense or waste any further time. So on the left, the NFQ, this is the one we're interested in today. This is the Irish framework, the QQI National Framework of Qualifications. So of course, anything in the IMAS, anything in the TrustED or the QQI Code of Practice that refers to different levels is talking about this. So why have I bothered to put the NQF, the UK Ofqual, on my table? Simply because when you're looking online, you may get confusing or conflicting information. Of course, the Trinity DIP TESOL, which we'll be talking about in more depth, is a UK qualification. So a lot of the literature talks about level 7 qualification this, level 7 qualification that. Likewise with certs and CELTA, you'll see a lot of people talking about level 5. That's simply because they were born, shall we say, in the UK, like myself. And a lot of the information online refers to that original Ofqual UK qualifications framework. When you're looking through the IMAS, when you're looking through the Code of Practice, the QA guidelines, anything to do with QQI and qualification levels, of course, this is the column, this middle column is the one that we're interested in. So, for example, a level 7 is an ordinary degree, a level 8 is an honours degree. And moving on to the DIP TESOL, this is a level 9. That puts it at the same level as an MA in terms of depth of inquiry. So not in terms of length, it's not the same. It's not like having an MA, but in terms of depth of inquiry, a DIP TESOL is pitched at level 9. The QQI framework has 10 levels. Okay, so let's have a look at academic manager qualification requirements. We've seen what the requirements are for teachers, which is a degree plus a teaching qual at level 6. For academic managers, it's the same. But if you have a teacher development role, and this is key, or if you want to have a teacher development role, then you need a level 9. In other words, what we're talking about today, the DIP TESOL, is a good fit for this requirement. Okay. What does teacher development mean? What does a teacher development role look like? Because you could be an academic manager without this. You could be looking just at administration and organization. But if you are involved in observing teachers, if you're involved in giving appraisals, feedback, if you're involved in developing CPD programs, if you've got oversight on these, then the requirement is for a level 9 teacher training qualification. Okay, and that's why we're suggesting the DIP TESOL, and that's what we run at Dublin TEFL here in Ireland. A quick overview of the DIP TESOL. What is it? It's a level 9, as we said. There are 150 hours guided learning and 450 hours of self-study. This gives a good indication of how it differs from, say, a Cert TESOL or a CELTA, or 120 hours programs. Those are all guided learning. A requirement at level 9, when you're at master's level, when you're at DIP TESOL level, is independent study. So this is worth considering if you're looking at doing this yourself or recommending it to others. This is a built-in requirement and will be a big difference, a big jump from cert level to DIP level. There are 4 assessment units. Let's quickly look at what they are. Unit 1 is all about language analysis, grammar, lexis, discourse, all your language systems. Methodology, the how, and also the why, and teacher development. So you can see a third of that assessment area. Currently, this is an exam. A third of that assessment area is on teacher development. Now, this is useful, of course, if you're involved in CPD programs, insets, and so on. I said currently, this is an exam. As of 2026, later in 2026, there will be some refreshed assessments coming online, and it's moving away from a sit-down exam format to an extended assignment. Unit 2 is project work, research projects. This includes observing teachers, observation projects. It includes action research, trying things out and reflecting on them, and independent mini research, which could involve, for example, questionnaire studies and so on. Unit 3 is an interview, an in-person, face-to-face interview. Sorry, it can be online, needn't be in person, but a face-to-face interview, looking at phonological theory in practice. So that's the big pronunciation aspect that often people highlight. I'll talk more about that later, but it's important to recognize that that's pronunciation or phonology in listening as well as speaking. Finally, Unit 4 is the lessons, the assessed teaching practice. With this, there's a very clear focus on the learners, on the immediate context, and on the learner's needs. A final thing to mention about these 4 areas is these are moving towards a modularized format, so that you can complete a unit and get a certificate for it as you go. This is, of course, quite motivating, and allows some progression and evidence of progression as you work through the whole qualification, the whole 4 units. Now, who is the DIP TESOL for? We're going to divide this up into teachers first and then academic managers. So DIP TESOL for teachers. Often teachers reach a stage. Maybe this is you, or maybe this is teachers you know, maybe this is your staff, your colleagues. They reach a stage where they think, right, it's time to move on. And why might that be? Here's an example of a few of the things we hear from teachers who are considering a DIP. And there are many other things that we would hear, but in summary, some people see it as a logical next step, and that's quite right. Moving on from a cert to progress their career, to move into other positions. It may be that they know a lot about procedures, so they know the how, they want to know the why things are working, or the opposite. Sometimes I've heard teachers say, I know something's not working or not quite working, and I don't understand why. I want to find out why. Moving into materials design, writing lesson materials, also, building up lessons over a course, building mini courses, building curriculum. This is something that's often an ambition for teachers, or an area that's been identified as a need, and so the DIP TESOL can help with this. Likewise, training, teacher mentoring, teacher support, CPD. These are areas that teachers might want to move into. And the last one, quite simply, feeling stuck in a rut, doing the same thing again and again. And this, of course, will impact on motivation. And if you're looking at this from a manager point of view, a staff point of view, it can impact your retention. Teachers will perhaps look elsewhere, look to do a different career if they feel like they're stuck doing the same thing. So where does the dip come in and help with these feelings, these attitudes? Well, as we can see in the table here, first of all, there's a clear practical link, the why. Why do certain things work? Why do certain things not work? Why are things designed like they are in certain materials? There's a clear link from theory, theories of learning, second language acquisition, a clear link from those theories to classroom practice. And there's a very, very strong practical element on the dip. It's not theory for theory's sake. For example, you have to give a rationale. I've put this in bold. It's a word that comes up again and again on the dip TESOL. Why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this? Not having these are my lesson aims, but why are these your lesson aims for these learners at this particular stage of the course? Likewise with the procedure, not just this is my lesson plan, stage one, stage two, stage three, but why have you got the stages in this order? Why are you doing these stages? Do you need them all? Likewise with the material, there has to be a critical awareness of whether this material is good and why it's good, and if not, how you might adapt it. So yeah, that word in bold, rationale, the why is very strong, and it's always linked to the learners in front of us. So you might have globally produced materials, you need to localize those. Of course, you'll broaden your teaching techniques when you do a dip. You'll have many more techniques to add to your toolkit. You can then cascade these to other teachers in your organization. And finally, those teachers who are looking at materials and curriculum design, this is something you can choose to focus on specifically. You can really make the qualification work for you, your interests, and maybe your school's needs. Choose to focus on designing a curriculum, choose to focus on designing some materials, and that can be part of your DIP coursework. I mentioned previously that pronunciation is often an area that's highlighted as something of importance for the DIP TESOL. And sometimes this creates fascination, but also fear amongst teachers. And here's a couple of attitudes that I would have heard a lot, from teachers when they're getting started. If we look at teacher A, for example, this is very common, not just here in Ireland, but also elsewhere, that the chart maybe doesn't quite match up with how teachers speak or how people locally speak as well. Those teachers like teacher B here who do deal with pronunciation say, well, I drilled the words, but apart from that, I'm not sure what to do. So maybe it's something that's been avoided. Maybe techniques are limited. Maybe there's a mismatch between ability and knowledge about pronunciation, the materials that teachers see, and the local context. So here in Ireland, how people speak around them in the classroom, how you speak as a teacher, wherever you are from. I myself, I'm not from here as well, so that's something I would be highlighting. And a mismatch between materials, globally produced materials, and local needs. So on the dip, and definitely on the dip that we have here at Dublin TEFL, there's a really strong focus on relevant aspects of pronunciation, aspects relevant to local context. Skip to the end or stick around to the end to see an example of how a teacher has made this work on their dip coursework. If we look at the second point here, I mentioned previously, but this is something to emphasize the goals of phonology work. It's not, or you might even say it's no longer looking at producing quote unquote correct pronunciation, whatever that is. There's a stronger awareness of English as a lingua franca, ELF, and the asymmetrical goals. You need to understand a lot more in terms of pronunciation than you do to produce. And the production of pronunciation and phonology comes down a great deal to international intelligibility combined with learner choice. What do they want to sound like? And there'll be a broad range of techniques studied on a DIP TESOL, how to help your learners, as well as developing teacher knowledge about phonology. And this happens through Unit 3, the phonology interview, and of course through the assessed lessons. Every lesson must have an integrated phonological point. Of course, all of that is useful for academic managers, but more specifically for academic managers, what areas of the DIP can really come into play and really help? observation is one key area. Let's look at this academic manager here is thinking about their academic manager duties. Um, Maybe this is you if you're watching. Maybe you are an academic manager, or maybe you want to move into this. Maybe this is the sort of thing that's happening in your school. So observation happens at induction. Yearly appraisals are going on. There's observations, for example, buzz observations or pop-ins, very short observations. This could happen yearly, and a form is filled in and feedback given to teachers who are observed. These are all good things. But perhaps when you're examining them, you're thinking, well, are these working? How are these working? Can I improve on them? Can I make them more specific? Can we expand on them? And that's going to be a duty that an academic manager might have. Now, the DIP can help on this because observing teachers is a very key part of the coursework. If we look at the Unit 2 project, one aspect of Unit 2 is specifically focused on observations. It must be related to observations. For example, with the current form, the observation instrument, or one part of Unit 2, you have to design a form that targets a relevant area. Maybe you look at how teachers are giving feedback to learners. Maybe you look at how teachers motivate and engage learners. Something very specific. I've given slightly broad areas, but you narrow it down to something specific that you then go and observe. And you design a form that you can give other teachers. So perhaps they could go and use that or an iteration of it in peer observations, for example. And of course, you will be observed in Unit 4 in the teaching practice. Your own observed lesson feedback can help inform areas to look for. Things that maybe you may not have thought of doing beforehand, might have been highlighted to you, and then that's something you can go and help other teachers with. The many examples come back from candidates, course participants who are doing Unit 4. It could be, for example, looking at emergent language. There's a lot of conversation around this. How do we become more reactive to learner needs? This is an area that a lot of teachers say, oh, I hadn't been given feedback on that. Now I have, and I'm going to go and help other teachers with that area. That's just one quick example. There are several different things depending on the teacher and depending on the school. How about with course books? A key question that's also often asked, and in fact requested for CPD sessions that we do with schools, is how can we use the course book more creatively, more communicatively, rather? How can we exploit what we have? We have to have a course book. We've got one. Learners have got it. Sometimes learners have feedback like there's too many bits of paper. Even if it's not paper, if it's digital, they might say, there's not something cohesive, holding things together. The teachers themselves say they just want to make lessons relevant and interesting. And this is a, fair point, isn't it? We do want to ensure that our lessons are relevant to our learners. So how will DIP help teachers with this? As I've mentioned before, that keyword rationale. So there's a strong emphasis on the rationale for materials. Why are these materials being used today and why in the course? Secondly, there's a strong emphasis on choosing communicative outcomes. In your lesson plan, you must have this, not just bits of language. So that links in very strongly with the sort of principle behind the CEFR of action-oriented language or functional language or achieving communicative goals, not just practicing language. And of course, you'll increase your techniques for adapting, extending, and exploiting materials, as well as we've said on the slide here, going materials light, a more dogme approach. CPD is another area that academic managers are often in charge of. Here's a summary of a typical school CPD program. There are monthly teacher meetings. This is great. There are CPD sessions, sometimes led by the academic manager. Sometimes people take turns. Recently, some example topics, use of new materials. Maybe there's a new tests, I don't know. Tech tools is a common one as well. Of course, AI use. This is very, very relevant now. And learner feedback, overall, it's good. Different areas are highlighted, but there's no big pattern coming through. If there was one thing all the learners are telling you, we want more of this, then that, of course, will zip to the top of your priority list of what you should do with your CPD. If you're not getting that, and you've already got some good topics done, you might find yourself in a situation where you're thinking, What's my next priority? What should it be? How can the dip help? Well, in the Unit 2 projects, those independent projects, there are things like a developmental record, a reflective journal, where teachers find a relevant area. They have to choose a good area for themselves, for their own development, and not just that, something that applies to their school. Experiment with it, evaluate whether these experiments were a success, and then you can cascade this. You can have that as a CPD session. Using that format as well is something you can pass on to other teachers. Maybe they don't have to do the complete coursework, but the format of experiment with two, three different things, come back and report can be a nice model for independent CPD. And of course, your new knowledge from Unit 1 methodology and from the Unit 4 teaching, as we mentioned earlier, can highlight possible new areas. Likewise, Unit 3, the phonology work may inspire you to pass on, cascade to teachers, or get them to choose areas they want to improve on. Not just choosing the topics, but running and sustaining interest in a CPD program. Occasionally, we would hear things like this. Teachers, the CPD sessions are well received, they like them, but are they then forgotten about? Um, are people motivated to come back to it, to continue, to have a kind of CPD strand running through the year? And of course, time. There's so many operational things to do in a busy school. There might be limited time to put together a school program, a CPD program. Maybe you're thinking, how can I get others involved more? Well, first of all, in Unit 1, a whole third, as I mentioned at the beginning, is CPD focused. So it's not just the kind of techniques, but also the how. How can you support teachers as learning? You'll be looking at things like teacher motivation, teacher cognition, how teachers develop, how teachers learn, including you yourself if you're doing the dip. In Unit 2, we've already mentioned how you may do a developmental project that you can then cascade and use as a model, but also the independent research project. This could focus on how to design, run, and sustain interest in a CPD program. A quick example of a past project was about setting up SIGs, special interest groups, in a school. So having the teachers themselves choose what they were interested in. This, of course, links very strongly to their motivation, their autonomy, their agency, and this was the focus of one DIP candidate, one teacher who was doing the DIP, and she set up some very successful special interest groups in her school, and that was a CPD program that started to, well, run itself, which can only be a good thing. Let's look at a few other key projects, especially projects that are relevant to an IMS application, TrustED validation, that often fall upon an academic manager. CEFR alignment, of course, updating assessments, perhaps, to make sure that they're relevant. Maybe there's use of new textbooks, or updating the textbooks and all the work that goes together with it, the schemes of work, or maybe there are extra short courses, their schemes of work, how you're going to assess those. And yes, the academic manager here possibly feeling a little overwhelmed. Um, One thing to think about is if you have one academic manager involved in this, how can you get other people involved as well? Now, on the dip, assessment literacy is a key focus throughout. So this will help you with designing assessments and ensuring they're valid, ensuring they're reliable. We've already mentioned materials design and evaluating the appropriacy for local context. Again, this is a key focus in your teaching, in the project, and so on. The Unit 2 projects can focus very deeply on course design, including various aspects of course design, needs analysis of your learners, maybe needs analysis including teachers, managers, material design or adaptation or selection, curriculum design, how would you sequence that in a curriculum? How do you assess it? How do you evaluate success? You could zoom into one or two of these areas as part of your Unit 2 projects. And finally, in your Unit 4 teaching, a key aspect of your rationale for doing a lesson can link to the CEFR. I'll emphasize again that part of the Unit 4 teaching is all about achieving communicative aims, not just bits of language. So the action-oriented communicative outcomes that you find in the CEFR are key. So working through Unit 4 teaching will be another way of helping with Aligning CFR alignment projects you might be undergoing in your school. Final thing for us, let's have a look at how that works in practice. I've mentioned here and there a few examples, but let's take one example. This is Sarah. She's an academic manager in Dublin. It's not a real name. In fact, she's kind of an amalgam, a pool of different candidates that we've had in the past. But these are real examples of coursework. Unit one, let's look at some things that Sarah, our various candidates, did. So she analysed and evaluated coursebook grammar lesson, and she suggested improvements for use in her school. She also designed a CPD session to make that grammar more useful for her students. With Unit 2, she conducted research to inform the design of a cultural program. So in her school, they were developing a new cultural thread in a lot of their courses. So she started off with a kind of needs analysis piece of research. She tried out herself ways of integrating culture, not having it as a standalone, but integrating it as a strand in her own lessons. Following that, she cascaded and gave a CPD workshop and designed that. That was part of her CPD portfolio, her Unit 2 portfolio. And she observed and gave feedback to other teachers on how they integrated culture with the use of the coursebook. Now, of course, your Unit 2 projects needn't be looking at culture. They could look at anything that is relevant to the teacher and relevant to their school. Unit 3, remember, is the phonology interview. Here's her title. It was helping B2 multilingual learners understand Dublin accents. She's in Dublin. She decided to look at this. You could look at a range of different things. And again, you'll notice this is something that is relevant. There's a strong rationale for helping learners do this in her context. Unit 4 teaching, there are various assessed lessons. Here's two examples of the sorts of things that teachers have done. These are, again, genuine lessons. So helping learners understand Irish comedy sketches and helping learners make small talk with colleagues. I'm sure you can think of learners for whom these would be very useful, concrete outcomes to a lesson. Okay, so that's our summary. If you're looking for more information, do go onto our website, dublintefl.com. We have a couple of pages looking at the TESOL specifically, one linking it to the TrustED requirement framework and landscape, shall we say. And I hope this gives you more of an idea of what the DIP is, how it can work for you. So how you can leverage, shall we say, the DIP to get things done that you need to get done anyway, how it can help you stay compliant, but also build and sustain real quality in your school.